I can't think of very many movies that leave me feeling as paranoid as Rosemary's Baby. Welcome back to The Haunted Beard, everybody. My name is Jake. Thank you once again for joining me. And if you're new around here, welcome to my channel. It's all horror and thriller movie content here on The Beard. Now, being that Apartment 7A is set to release here in a couple weeks, that of course being the prequel story to Rosemary's Baby, I figured it'd be a good idea to go back and revisit the classic from 1968 directed by Roman Polanski starring Mia Farrow. Now, I have seen Rosemary's Baby before, but it had been quite a few years since I watched it, and while I remembered some of the highlights, there was a lot of the details that I didn't have a super clear memory on, and so a lot of this felt like I was watching it for the very first time. And man, this is a pretty great film, so I want to give you my review and some thoughts, so here we go, let's do it. And Rosemary's Baby, of course, tells the story of Rosemary Woodhouse, played by Mia Farrow, and her husband Guy, played by John Cassavetes. They want to start a new chapter of their lives, want to become parents and have a baby, and they move into this aging apartment in New York Central Park where they find themselves surrounded by very peculiar neighbors. I often find it pretty interesting going back and watching films that are considered to be classic and trying to kind of put myself in the mindset of somebody at that time watching the movie, and then now many, many years later, what is it about the movie that kind of makes it a quote-unquote classic? You know, what about it stands the test of time, and why is it a film that people continually revisit for years and years? And Rosemary's Baby is a movie that you can tell has been pretty influential on a handful of modern-day horror films. But I want to get into some of the highlights and what I think works quite well about this movie. First off, let's talk about the characters and the performances, and specifically focusing in on the character of Rosemary and Mia Farrow's performance. I really like Rosemary's character, as she has a handful of attributes that, for me anyway, it kind of just endears us to her as an audience. And one of those is that she just comes across as this very gentle, kind soul. This woman who, she wants to be a good wife. She desperately wants to be a mother. She just wants to have this good, happy life and raise a kid. And yet throughout the film and all the horror that happens to her, she holds on to this hope for a brighter future, right? She has this hope that having a child is going to bring her this amazing fulfillment. And so she tries to take everything in stride, and she has this strength about her and this positivity about her that no matter what happens, she's going to get through it because she loves and cares for this baby that's inside of her. And she just knows that if she can just get to the end, everything's going to be okay. At least that's kind of what I see in this character. And that's something that I just can't help but admire. It's this woman who is willing to fight through all sorts of craziness. She's also, too, this woman who gets horrifically gaslit throughout the entire movie, but she stays true to what she knows and what she fully believes is true and real, and just maintains that conviction throughout the entire movie. And so that's a quality about Rosemary's character that I really like. Another highlight for me is the pacing. And I was thinking about trying to describe and explain how this film is paced, and it's almost kind of weird because this is definitely a slow burn movie, but I feel like the pacing is fast. It's a slow burn of a movie, but it moves quickly. There are so many scenes, it feels like, and I think the editing here is really tight and very efficient, and it keeps us invested. It doesn't ever feel too slow or too bogged down. It moves at a very quick pace, even though you have that very sort of slow burn, gradual reveal and build throughout the movie. There are scenes that happen where characters are having conversations, and the film just kind of cuts away from the scene and starts another scene, almost like in the middle of a conversation. And it's kind of jarring, but the movie just moves so quick. It has a very seamless editing style to it. It all flows together very well. You know, we're covering a decent length of time, you know, her full 9-month pregnancy and then some. And so the passage of time and everything, it just really flows really, really well. As I just mentioned, this film is a slow burn, and that really lends to how well constructed this story is. I love the way Polanski directs it and how everything is presented. This is a supernatural horror film, but it is extremely grounded and very realistic. And I love how it maintains that realistic approach. It never leans too far into the supernatural element by maintaining that grounded, realistic approach. And so there's such a perfect balance, because what that balance does is it makes you paranoid. And I love that we, for the most part, see basically the entire film through Rosemary's eyes. You know, we are seeing things from her perspective. We are experiencing it the way she experiences it. And there are so many things that happen throughout this film that cause us to feel paranoid and second guess ourselves. And the film is peppered with so many instances like that. There was a point in the movie where I just simply paused it and all of a sudden realized like how caught up in everything I'd become. Like I was getting paranoid. Like every little thing that happened, I was questioning it.
I know this sounds crazy, but I've got books here. Look.
I was like, wait, what? Why did that happen? Was that planned? Is there something going on here? Or is that just some sort of convenient, coincidental thing? And before I realized it, I was totally and completely wrapped up into this, just like Rosemary, where I was questioning everything, and that paranoia just had fully set in.
Now, maybe all this is coincidence, but one thing is for sure, they have a coven and they want my baby.
And that's what works so great about this film. It creates such an immersive experience, and all the little details matter, from things like the blood sample that the Dr. Saperstein asks for her, to the tannis root in the drink that Minnie, the neighbor, makes her, to things like Hutch going into a coma and then Hutch missing his glove. And then when you find out that the actor Baumgart is missing his tie, to Roman having his ear pierced, and then the anagram for the name Stephen Marcato. All these little things just continually slow burn and gradually build and build and build until the paranoia is just off the charts. And we just constantly guess and question Rosemary's state of mind throughout the movie. There's a scene later on in the film where she is in a phone booth waiting for Dr. Hill to call her back. And the guy standing outside the phone booth with his back to her looks like Dr. Saperstein. And we're like, is that him? Are they really following her? Is there some grand conspiracy and plot going on? Polanski squeezes every last drop of paranoia and suspense and tension building until literally the last very few minutes, to where you just continually going back and forth and back and forth. It is masterfully crafted paranoia. I've also got to talk about the nightmare sequence where Rosemary is you-know-what by the devil. Man, that scene 55-ish years later, it's still pretty twisted and messed up. Just some gnarly imagery. I like kind of the nightmare dreamlike imagery with just some bizarre, weird, crazy stuff. There's enough of it there to where it doesn't make things super clear and obvious that like, oh, this is absolutely real. It still kind of gets you to question things like, well, is she just sort of having this crazy nightmare? But man, just a really well done, very memorable sequence, very memorable imagery. I like how it's all kind of edited and just some of the cross-cutting and overlapping and just the whole bizarre, twisted sort of vibe to it. It's very well done, and it holds up quite well. Now, from what I've read, Polanski stayed extremely faithful to the book that this film was adapted from, and so I feel like it's fair to assume that the book is also probably presented through Rosemary's eyes. But I love that he decided to do that as well. And I love that presentation because so much of what happens in this movie we don't see. And a lot of what sends the plot for and moves the plot forward happens off screen. And we, just like Rosemary, are kind of just there experiencing the consequences and the aftermath of things that people do and decisions that are made without our knowledge or understanding and realization that they've been made. There are a handful of shots in this film where Rosemary is simply looking kind of down a hall into a room where somebody's in that room. Sometimes they're having a conversation on the telephone, and so she gets a little bit of the information, but she doesn't exactly know all the information. There's this great shot that if you're watching this movie for the first time, you wouldn't think anything of it, but if you go back and rewatch it, the shot has so much significance where she and her husband go over to Roman and Minnie's house for the very first time. And there's that shot where she is with Minnie in the kitchen and she looks down the hall into, I think, the living room or the den where her husband and Roman are having a conversation. And all you can see from her perspective, you can't see any of the characters, but you just see this puff of cigar smoke or pipe smoke. And you know that they're in there having this conversation. And I love, again, kind of the restraint and simplicity of that, because that's where the whole plot starts. But she knows that people are in there, but they're having a conversation. She doesn't know what they're talking about, but that's what sends everything into motion. And then there's a handful of scenes kind of like that where people are talking in other rooms and you maybe hear a few words and part of the conversation, but so much of what Rosemary hears and sees are just little bits and pieces. And so much of what happens just down the hall, behind a closed door, or in another room that she's not in. And there's something about that I just find really interesting and captivating. And you can't help but think like, well, what really goes on behind closed doors? What really goes on in rooms when people are talking and you're not there to hear? What are they talking about? Can you really trust the people that you think you know and love? And just that, which again, lends greatly to the whole paranoid vibe that this thing gives off. All right, before I wrap up this review, I want to give some thoughts on the ending, because the ending is the only part in the film that I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. So if you've seen the film, of course, you know, Rosemary discovers this kind of secret door in the closet that opens up into the neighbor's house. She goes in there and finds all these people in there, and her baby is there. And of course, the plot is real. They're all witches, hail Satan, all that craziness. She looks down into the crib and freaks out, right?
What have you done to it?
I like all that. My main issue just comes with like the last minute where Roman invites Rosemary over and essentially invites her to be the baby's mother. She's like, well, you've uncovered the secret now. You know about all this. Why don't you come be the baby's mother? And it ends with her looking down at her baby and she kind of smiles and then credits roll. And my initial reaction to it, I was like, man, I don't know that I fully buy that her character would just sort of accept it and go along with it. The more I thought about it, I thought, well, maybe she would. I think part of me is maybe a little unsatisfied with it because I feel like if this movie was made today, it would certainly end with some crazy bloodshed. She would probably try to start killing people or stab her husband or something crazy. A movie like this made today is not going to get out of there without somebody dying or some blood being spilt sort of thing. So maybe there's a little bit of that. But in kind of questioning if this would really be her decision, I was kind of thinking about it more and I was like, well, what other option does she really have? There's not really anything else she can do. She kind of just has to accept it if she wants to be a mother and raise her child. And so part of me kind of appreciates the ending because, as I've talked about, Polanski maintains a very grounded, realistic approach throughout this entire thing. And I feel like he still maintains that even with the very final decision that Rosemary makes, that the movie doesn't kind of turn into a very over Hollywoodized kind of thing. And, you know, it maintains that realism to where, like, if something like this were to actually happen, it's like you could kind of just see her being like, well, I don't know what else to do. I'm not going to be alone all by myself, so I might as well just go along with it kind of thing. So I'm still a little conflicted overall on the ending, but I totally respect Polanski's decision to kind of go with, I think, the more realistic decision there. But Anyways, overall, this is a great film. If you haven't seen it, definitely go check it out. If you have seen it, now is a good reason to rewatch it. Like I said, with Apartment 7A coming out later this month. Very curious about that one. Prequels for me are... they're tough to pull off successfully, but I do have some hope for this one. The director, Natalie Erica James, this is her second film, and her first film came out a few years ago. It was called Relic, and I thought it was really well done, and kind of one of those movies that not a lot of people talked about, sort of flew under the radar, but I was pretty impressed with it. I would recommend it if you haven't seen that film. And so I have some hopes and some expectations that she'll be able to do something good with Apartment 7A. So plan on reviewing it, though. We'll see what happens when it comes out. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. Greatly appreciate it. If you got anything out of this, go ahead and do me a favor and do not click that subscribe button unless you want to be haunted by the beard.